From a long legal history filled with domestic violence and traffic offenses, to the conviction leading to a major setback for his skyrocketing career, here's the real reason Gervonta Davis is sentenced to house arrest.
It was, you know what I mean? I had to get through it. You know, no matter if he's taller, shorter, get through it. That's my whole object.
For one, Davis has an extensive legal history with incidents outside the ring, and he's even been arrested a few times. Rewind to 2017, and it was the first time fans had seen this side of him. Back then, the police issued an arrest warrant after Davis was accused of first-degree aggravated assault, but that later changed to misdemeanor second-degree assault, and a few months later, the charges were dropped entirely. About a year later in 2018, things were heating up again, when he got arrested right in the middle of a street fight, but that was quickly wrapped up too. Fast forward to 2020, and the charges got worse. This time he was arrested and up in Miami-Dade County Court with misdemeanor counts of simple battery, domestic violence, along with a controversial video where he was aggressively grabbing the mother of his child, right in the middle of a very public charity basketball game, with people and cameras everywhere. But as with any other case, the prosecution abandoned the charges, and he was released. But wait until you hear the next one, because the most recent case in December 2022 had him taken away on a case on battery causing bodily harm, where he hit a woman on the side of her head, which the police described as a closed-hand tire slap. And that wasn't even the end of it, because TMZ even released exclusive audio of a phone call between the accuser and 911, where she repeatedly claimed she was in danger as she ran to her car. But I gotta say, it definitely seems shady when the accuser walked back in to release Davis by retracting his statement, and thanks to the end of that fiasco, he was able to get in the ring and defend his WBA regular lightweight title against Hector Luis Garcia in January 2023. Now tell me, doesn't it seem weird that Davis manages to get out of every one of his cases every single time? It seems like the court's putting an end to that now, because right after the biggest win of his career against Ryan Garcia, his future in boxing was put on hold until his court date that was set for May 5th, 2023. The court had a whole case set up against him, where he was allegedly involved in a hit-and-run incident back in November 2020. That's right, it's been a few years, but it's finally time for him to own up to what he did. Now, Davis pled guilty to up to 4 charges, which included domestic violence, hit and run, and the fact that he never showed up in court. So prosecutors recommend a 5-year suspended sentence, topped with some much-needed anger management classes. But the judge wasn't ready to accept a plea agreement. That would have brought down his jail time to 0. And that's why the time leading up to May 5th wasn't easy, because he was facing 14 charges after being accused of fleeing the scene of an accident that involved multiple people, even a pregnant woman. To top it off, he wouldn't provide identification and license to the authorities, mostly because his license was suspended. That said, if this case wasn't going to end up in his favor, he could land in prison for 7 years on those charges. On the other hand, a sentencing of anger management and community service still gonna punish Davis, without impacting his boxing career, which is on top right now. But jail time was gonna sideline his career and earnings, and you'd finally have to say goodbye to one of the brightest stars in the sport. With the court's hearing, everything was at stake: his freedom, reputation, earnings, everything. But when the time came, he got 90 days of house arrest and 3 years of probation instead, topped with 200 hours of community service, avoiding jail time completely. On top of that, he's gonna pay $165 in court fees, along with a $100 fine, and 10 sessions with Mothers Against Drunk Driving. Although, I'm not so sure if that's gonna make a huge difference. Now, that's brought up a lot of mixed reactions, considering his legal history and how terrible the accident was. So, let me break it down for you with a few deets, so you can tell me whether you think that's a good enough punishment. Because according to the prosecution, back in 2020, Davis left the Medusa restaurant and lounge in a 2020 Lamborghini Urus, and ran a red light, hit another vehicle, all before crashing into the fence of a 7-Eleven. At the time, another car showed up at the scene, picked up Davis and a woman who was in the car with him, and left. But here's the important bit. There was a pregnant woman who was also injured in the crash, who claims no one ever came to help her. Sure, reports say he compensated 3 of 4 people injured in the crash for their injuries and losses, but he still missed out on the one victim, Jair Smith, who isn't ready to let this case end so easily. So maybe the 90-day house arrest is definitely a far cry from the maximum penalty of 50 months in prison. Jair confirmed that she never received compensation or even an apology, and if that wasn't enough, Davis seemed to have absolutely no regret for his actions. So after all the physical and emotional trauma, Jair is asking for about $92,000 from Davis just for the out-of-pocket medical expenses after the accident, because she's been through some serious injuries, including permanent damage to her knee, all at the age of 18. As for Davis's attorney, Michael Tomko, he said that the boxer has changed and shifted his focus to his career to become the face of boxing, who's also inspiring millions of children in Baltimore.
In the future, we probably, in the future for sure, try to build the team much bigger so we can have people for that.
To top it off, Davis's coach Calvin Ford also testified that the boxer has made his mistakes and owned up to them, taking care of everything he needed to. As for Davis himself, he took a vow of silence throughout the hearing and let his attorney do all the work. But the circuit judge Althea Handy wasn't buying any of that and claimed that Davis thinks he's above the law, especially considering his endless series of reckless actions. Todd was zero remorse over what happened with Smith. He's been guilty, he's been on probation, but nothing worked because he believes he can get out of it every single time. And that's exactly why Handy threatened to have Davis serve his 90 days in jail if he wasn't going to find a place to stay in Baltimore on time, because Handy wasn't going to let him go to his Florida home. That's when Ford stepped in, offering his place so Davis could complete his sentence, which wrapped up the matter quickly enough. But even after that, he can't leave his home for the gym either. So if he wants to stay at the top of his game by the time all this is over, I'd suggest he start searching for some pretty great home workouts now. But if you're thinking that's the end of it, you'd be so wrong. It turns out the Baltimore native, who's living in Florida now, is also a defendant in a domestic violence case in Broward County. But he hasn't pleaded guilty in the misdemeanor battery case. The next trial is set for May 26, 2023, which means things could get worse. So until then, the boxing pound-for-pound superstar's career has been put on hold, and I gotta admit, it's a pretty bad time. Just think about it. On April 22nd, Davis beat Garcia in a fight that got him 1.2 million pay-per-view buys, topped with a $22.8 million gate, which, by the way, is the 5th largest gate for boxing in Nevada history. After a win like that, Davis became one of the most popular fighters in the sport, with an unbeatable record of 29 victories and 27 knockout wins. So now he's the face of boxing, although that might change with how his criminal record is progressing. I mean, you won't even see him step into the ring soon after that sentence. Right now, his future in boxing is very uncertain. Sure, he's got 3 potential opponents lined up after his knockout win over Garcia, including Devin Haney and Vasily Lomachenko. That could have been a game changer for his career, but I gotta admit, I don't think you're gonna see an epic fight soon enough. For one, he's out of the ring for 3 months at least. On top of that, he can't keep training during all this either. And given his terrible legal history, do you think he'd manage to keep himself out of trouble, even if his career is on the line this time? I wouldn't be too sure about it. At the moment, it seems like all of his legal cases piled up are sinking his career down the drain, and if he doesn't make a comeback soon enough, he might not be able to salvage whatever's left.
Hearing that, being around my friends and they talking about, like, other people talking about how much they gonna be excited for the fight, it means a lot.
So from the conviction leading to a major setback for his skyrocketing career, to a long legal history filled with domestic violence and traffic offenses, that was the real reason Gervonta Davis was sentenced to house arrest.
My coach is like my father. I got wrong. He like a dad. That stay on me. I'm just glad to be able to come